Welcome to Brothers of the Word, because, brother, you need the Word. And today's message will be coming from the first book of the Bible, Genesis chapter 22 and verse 6. And as I asked God what to speak about today, he simply spoke this one verse to me. Genesis chapter 22 and verse 6. And this is a story that you are familiar with, and it reads, "And Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it upon Isaac, his son. And he took the fire in his hand and a knife, and they went both of them together." And I want to speak to you for a few minutes today from the subject, what are you willing to sacrifice? What are you willing to sacrifice? Now this verse, it is the root of the sacrifice that God asked Abraham to do. Abraham had really two children. He had Ishmael first, and then he had the promised child, Isaac. And here was a child that Abraham and Sarah had labored for years to get. Sarah was 90 years old, Abraham 100. And they had been praying to God for a child, and finally, the promised child was delivered. And here, after they got the child, something that they had been struggling for 80 plus years. And after they had received the child, God tells Abraham to go and sacrifice your child to me. Can you imagine what it would be like if the thing that you held the most precious in life, God were to say, sacrifice this thing unto me? And see, the sacrifice was different. And that's why some things that God tells you, they don't make logical sense, because if you were to do that today, you would get locked up. If you were even to mention that you were going to kill your child, you would either get locked up by the police or mama would shoot you first. If you even hinted that you were going to do something like this. So here was God telling Abraham to do something that went against the grain of logic, and it went against the grain of his personal desires, to go and give up that which he held the most dear. What are you willing to sacrifice? Are you willing to sacrifice the thing to you that is the absolute most precious in life? And then some of you have to stop and ask yourself that question. What is the most precious in life to me? For different people, that's different. To some people, the most precious thing in life is just their hair. Now, that may sound crazy, but you can always gauge what's most precious to you by what you spend the most time on. Now, if you're spending 2 hours a day on your hair, an hour a day on your kids, your hair is way up there in the rankings. Way up there in the rankings as to what's actually most precious to you. And some of the stuff may sound silly, but when you really ask the question, I preached a sermon called Weevil. And Weevil had to do the fact that so many people in America were buying hair that was sacrificed to other gods out of India. But yet the women in India will go to the temple and they'll shave themselves completely bald. And they have this long flowing hair that's often down to the middle of their backs. and they'll shave themselves completely bald to their God. But if God were to speak to some women in America and to tell them, I want you to just sacrifice to me your hair, and I want you to go and shave off all this hair that you have spent so much time and so much money on. I just want you to just sacrifice to me your hair. Women in the Christian church, if they just heard a booming voice to tell them this, my child, just sacrifice your hair to me. Not your child, just your hair. Not your money, just your hair. The people in Hinduism often have a greater sense of sacrifice to their God than we have to our God. What are you willing to sacrifice? And see, the sacrifice that Abraham made, it not only required that he kill what he loved, but that he burned it up so there was nothing left but ashes. The thing would have been unrecognizable. So here he was, he had to completely give up that which he loved. But Abraham had enough faith to know that whatever he gave unto God, God could give it back to him multiplied and even better. Abraham had enough sense to know that nothing sacrificed to God was in vain. As a matter of fact, Abraham believed that if he killed and burned up his son, he would walk down with his son on the way down the mountain. He had just that much confidence in God that whatever I gave to God was not in vain, and it would return unto me blessed and multiplied. It's when God calls for you to let something go. What are you willing to sacrifice? And oftentimes your true love of God, it will be shown just in the answer to that question, what are you willing to sacrifice? And what are you attached to that's so strong that if God asked you to sacrifice this thing, you'd have some issues? Now, oftentimes, the things that we are attached to so strong that God commands us to sacrifice, it's nothing material at all. It's some stuff on the inside. Suppose God spoke to you and said, my child, forgive this person. Now, oftentimes, he doesn't have to speak to you through a booming voice. It's in his word. Forgive those. Love your enemies. Suppose God spoke to you in his word and told you to forgive. Can you sacrifice the unforgiveness that you have? Do you know that's in God's word? Do you know that even unforgiveness is a hindrance to your healing? But yet there is a part of us that when someone perceivably has done us wrong, and oftentimes they haven't even done you wrong, that's stuff in your head. Because if you ask them, they got a whole different story about it. But yet we got this stuff in our heart. And suppose God asks you, my child, clear the unforgiveness, lay that on the altar and give all that to me. Clear it out of your heart. Some of us cannot even let go of unforgiveness because we've been with it sometimes so long that it becomes comforting to us to have unforgiveness and have blame to other folk. It has grown a part of us, and when God asks us to sacrifice it, we can't get rid of it. God will tell you, my child, be at peace. Sacrifice your anger. Sacrifice all the stuff you're mad about. But yet we often cannot do that. We can't sacrifice some of the base emotions that exist in us. God will tell us to sacrifice jealousy. Yes, there are some people who have more than we do. There always will be. I don't care what you get, how big you become, there's always going to be someone who has more than you in some area. You can accumulate all the money in the world and you become the richest person in the world. Somebody else is going to be younger and better looking and have a prettier wife. You can get all this stuff, and yet somebody else will always have more than you will in some areas.